So Kliff Kingsbury was up and at him today, talking about Terry McLaurin and the offense as a whole. Here's what Kliff said about Terry and the time on task, or lack thereof.
And then with Terry, what kind of things can you do now even to help make sure that when he gets back out in the field, that there's not this long transition period to get that rhythm and connection back with Jaden?
Yeah, with him or just kind of overall?
With Terry in particular.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a ton of contact with him. You know, he's been here, but he's been working with the trainers. So until he gets back on the grass, that's when we'll start building that back up.
At that point, what can you do at that point to make sure it doesn't take a long time?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's one of those deals. It's just time on task. And luckily what they had last year to build a lot of rapport and chemistry. And Terry understands our system going into a year or two. So that should expedite the process. But to me, it's time on task together on the grass is really the only way that you can continue to build.
All right, so there are some flags in here that we need to address in those specific comments first. I think an orange flag, Max, is that Kliff was kind of nudging and saying he needs to get on the practice field. He needs to get on the grass. We're going to label that as an orange flag. It's not a reason for alarm, but it's also not a green flag. You see orange and you're like, all right, there's something going on here that isn't absolutely spectacular. We are labeling as a red flag the fact that Kliff Kingsbury just said there has not been a lot of contact between himself and Terry, because through this entire process, I was under the impression, and likely you were under the impression, that while Terry wasn't practicing, he was still participating in every other way, shape, or form, attending meetings, talking to people, hanging out with teammates, so on and so forth. Anything that you could consider participating inside the building, I was under the impression that he was doing all of that. Just when it came time to practice, he would work with the trainers, handle whatever the day had in regards to the training. That could be running, stretching, mobility, whatever their plan was. And then eventually he would come out to practice, sign some autographs, go back in, do the meetings, do the film, all of those things. What Kliff Kingsbury just said is there has not been a lot of that. So that is the first red flag that we are going to hold up on the comments that Kliff Kingsbury made today about Terry McLaurin. He went further. So this is what Kliff said about the classroom work with Terry to this point in the offseason.
Hey, Kliff, going back to Terry real quick, you talk about, gelling with the offense on the grass. How much work are you getting with him in the classroom, and kind of at this point of the season, how high value is that? Is the meeting work?
Yeah, I think, not as much as we would if he was full go. There's no doubt. But I think, like I said, I'm huge on walkthroughs, on practice, things like that, because until you get on the grass and actually do it and feel the timing, feel the depths of routes and things of that nature, I don't know exactly how much you can get out of that. So I think we're kind of at that point to where we need to start getting those guys when they're available out there and gelling and seeing what we are as an offense.
So these are two red flags here. It doubles down what Kliff just said, doubles down on what I took away from the first comment, is that Terry is not as active as I was under the impression he was when it comes to classroom work, meetings, working with the offense, being in communication with at least Kliff. Maybe he's talking to wide receiver coaches. Maybe he's talking to other guys on the staff. But from what Kliff just said there has not been a ton of communication in terms of the classroom work. Now, I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination on how to run a football team. But I would think that if you cannot get out there on the grass, you would maybe go extra hard on the non-grass related things in the classroom, in meetings, in film. I would think there would be an emphasis on doing all of those things, maybe to a greater degree, to make sure that when you eventually and inevitably do make your way back to the grass, you hit the ground running, pun fully intended there. From what Kliff said in the beginning portion of that statement, that is not happening the way that I was under the belief that it was happening. And then red flag number 2, that's 3 for anyone that is counting on just 2 clips. Red flag number 3 is that he is urging Terry to get back out there. And again, this is the first time that anybody has had any real sense of urgency when it comes to speaking about Terry publicly. Behind closed doors, I'm sure this has been said for days, weeks, potentially months. But for the first time publicly, someone is saying we would really like it if he gets to practice, if he is out there so he can gel with this unit, if he is out there so me as a coach, I understand what I am working with. And you know what Terry is like. So there is a little bit of benefit of this is not a new offense. This is not a whole lot of new faces on the coaching staff. So you understand what Terry represents as a player from a skill set position. But I'm also not expecting, and you should not be expecting, the offense in 2025 to be exactly the same as the offense in 2024. There are going to be adjustments, especially with the addition of a guy like a Deebo Samuel, who you can now move around in a bunch of different ways, especially with the addition of a guy like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and how that impacts the rotation with the running backs and the addition of Laramie Tunsil. And there's so many different new pieces on this offense that there was bound to be some sort of adjustment and just natural evolution from year to year. You can't go from year to year having the exact same thing. Eventually, defenses are going to catch on, and eventually they'll find ways to stop it. So it's fair to think that they're going to be making some changes. And now, because we are halfway through the month of August, Terry has not been out on the field practicing any of those changes, any of those evolutions in the offense. And from what Kliff has just said in those last two sound bites, he's not getting as much classroom work as I think Kliff certainly wants him to have been having. I mean, he's not saying this if he's thrilled with what's going on right now. This is a little bit of an opening into what is going on behind closed doors. He continued here. Here's what he said about the offense continuing to gel throughout training camp.
Hi, Coach. Looking at this offense overall, have you seen them come together, starting to mash and gel?
Yeah, I think that's a work in progress. There's no doubt. I don't think until we get some of these other pieces back, we're going to know exactly what we are. We've had some good opportunities to see other guys get work in these positions, but when you don't have your kind of projected top two outside receivers, one of your projected or both your projected inside pieces at guard, it's not going to really give you the chance to gel or really build that relationship until you get everybody else on the grass. So that's something we have to get to over the next 3 weeks.
There is a little bit of frustration here, Max, that I don't know we have heard a ton from Kliff Kingsbury in the first year and change of him being here in DC.
And there's one little moment in it that I feel like you hear the frustration. It's where he pauses when you don't have your, and then he thinks for a second. He's like, "Oh, I got to throw Noah Brown's name in here too." So
I got to add more than just Terry here. I can't keep taking shots at the number one wide receiver, because don't make any mistake about it. Terry is listening. He is listening. His agent is listening to these comments. We are at the point where this is really like crunch time to get a deal done. There is a different sense of urgency, I feel like, to get a deal done, because again, it's August 15th. You play a real legitimate football game in less than a month. None of this preseason nonsense against Cincinnati and a bad defense, against a joint practice that is no longer, against the Baltimore Ravens. You play a real legitimate game against a real divisional opponent who, by the way, happens to have a really good defense, or at least is projected to have a really good defense. I don't know that offense is going to be spectacular, but I have no issue being honest and saying that defensive line for New York is frightening. They got a bunch of dudes out there. So I do like that he did include, we'll give Kliff a green flag for this. I do like that he also included the guards, with Brandy Coleman obviously being the big one there. Now, that's a red flag in itself, because Coleman now has missed a significant chunk of time as well with his own injury. So it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but how much are you really going to get better on offense in training camp if you do not have your full slate of offensive weapons that are out there on the field? And this is the time where you are supposed to be getting better. I have never been one, and I don't think I ever will be one, to freak out over a bad preseason highlight. I've been on the other side where I've had some positive freakouts. We all remember the summer of Doxson and Pryor. We all were there. We freaked out together. We're like, oh my God, look at this one-handed grab. Oh my God, he's mossing defenders. Like, we all were there. We've had some positive freakouts. I've never been one to have a negative freakout about something going on in training camp. because I understand this is when you are supposed to be getting all of the issues out of your system. You're kind of supposed to be bad in training camp so you can be good by the start of the regular season to get everybody on the same page and to really hit the ground running in the regular season. If Terry is not out there, if Noah is not out there, if Brandon Coleman is not out there, what are your realistic expectations going to be? Because the unfortunate reality for how Washington and their schedule line up in 2025, it's a lot more difficult than 2024. There aren't a lot of rest periods that you could point to and say, well, at least you have 2 or 3 games that should be comfortable. There were a bunch of those last year. Not the case this year. So having your guys miss significant chunks of time, now having your offensive coordinator speak in a way that is not, super pro pom-pom cheerleader, get Terry out here. We're so excited for him when he's here. This is the first time where anyone's been like, we need to get all of our guys out here or our expectations are going to be shifted. One final thing from Kliff here again. This is all from this morning. This was about like 8:30 a.m., 8 a.m. whenever Kliff got to the microphone. So this is all from this morning. Here's what Kliff said about the wide receiver group as a whole so far throughout training camp.
And have you been able to see from the wide receiver room what you need to see from that group and how are they shaping up together?
Yeah, it's still a work in progress. Some guys are taking advantage of the opportunities and some have not. And that's what we wanted to see without, Terry and Noah getting much. We know what Debo is. And then there's a lot of guys that are trying to earn a roster spot. And so that competition has been good, but I think there's still a lot to show over the next 3 weeks.
This is not maybe great for the Ja'Cory Brooks hive, the Jalen Lane hive. We probably need better nicknames. The hive was great with Heineke and Howe because there was alliteration.
Exactly.
So I might need a little bit more time to think of what we call those fan bases who have been very, very loud. And to their credit, I'm excited about Jalen Lane. I'm very optimistic about Ja'Cory Brooks making the roster, but I have not stooped down to the level where I think Ja'Cory Brooks is going to replace the production that Terry has had by any stretch of the imagination.
Hey, man, I've heard reports out of training camp this morning that he's been making some great plays.
He made a tough catch today. Sick. I'm not of the belief that he is going to replace Terry. So those guys have had good summers, certainly. You think they're going to make the roster? Certainly. But they need Terry. They need Noah Brown out there. So just in 4 comments there, we had what we will call definitively 3 red flags from Kliff. And he was the first person to nudge Terry McLaurin to say, hey, buddy, we would like you at practice. We need you at practice. If we want to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves and that are being set by the outside world, myself, those of us on this station, those of us across the hall, the national media, everybody considering Washington a legitimate contender for a Super Bowl for the first time in well over a decade. Vegas in there as well. They think very, very highly of Washington in the NFC. If we're going to achieve all of these things, we need Terry McLaurin, and we need Terry McLaurin to practice.